Hey there everybody, welcome to Tucktuk's Trinkets and Terrain. My name's David, and for this week's video I decided that I wanted to build something from the newest Dungeons & Dragons adventure, the Wild Beyond the Witchlight, which is just a wild adventure. If you haven't checked it out, it's very non-traditional, I guess, so if you're interested in that, I definitely recommend it. But the thing I settled on making was the big top from the circus, which is the first little bit of the adventure. And this video will be spoiler free, so you don't need to worry about that. The circus is just the first little chunk where sort of things get introduced and set up. But as you can see, it turned into a pretty large project. I wanted to make sure that it made sense, that it was large enough for the acts and shows to be performed in. But this actually turned into one of my more favorite projects which I've made, which was kind of surprising in all honesty, but I'm going to show you what I did and how I did it, and I hope you enjoy. To start things off, I traced out my footprint of my tent onto some chipboard, and then I marked out where I wanted all my support posts to go, and for that I'm just going to use these dowel rods that I cut to length and just hot glue these on all around my outside edge here. And then I've got three longer ones for the center to create the three sort of peaks in the middle of the tent. Now the only reference picture I could find for the tent itself is on the map in the book. You can see here that I've added a bunch of supports to make sure everything is less wobbly. But the reference picture that I used was very small and not a lot of detail, but that's what I was going off of just for reference. Now this is a pillowcase that I'm going to use for the main bulk of the tent structure. You can see I cut off one edge, and I'm going to use that for the, I guess, wall sections. Just used some hot glue to attach it to my first post here. This will end up being the entrance down the road. Just kept using hot glue and keeping the pillowcase as taut as possible as I went around all the outside edges. This ends up not being perfect, but in the long run, it just gives it some more character and uniqueness that I was fine with down the road. Here it is all attached together. And then I soaked the whole thing in some 50-50 water and PVA glue to strengthen it, as well as really just secure all of the bonds to the dowel rods. I let that dry overnight just to make sure it was nice and hard and it wasn't going to go anywhere when I went on to the next step. You can see I've also spray painted the inside black. I did this at this step just to make it a little easier on myself, so I didn't have to reach in there with like a paintbrush or anything. Now for the top, I'm just gonna use the rest of my pillowcase that I've cut open, so it's just one layer of the cloth instead of two. And again, just hot gluing this down on the edges, trying to keep it as taut as possible as I stretch it around the outside and over the three central spires. This ends up getting a little wonky on the back here. You can see I've got some weird creases and overlaps that I just wasn't sure how to get rid of. I do end up sort of fixing it down the road, or at least good enough for my purposes, but for now that's just gonna be ugly. So I trimmed off all the extra pillowcase around the edges, and then again I'm just gonna soak this in some 50-50 water and PVA glue, really paying attention to where the cloth contacts everything, again just to make sure all the bonds are really secure. I let that dry overnight, and then I took it outside and spray painted it white. I was going to use some bright colors, and I figured white would be a better base coat than my normal black. But to get the design, I'm going to use this ruler and a pencil to sort of trace out where I want all of the different colored segments to go. You can see I've kind of already started on the back here off camera, but just kind of tracing from the central spires to the posts that make up the walls. You can see this is kind of the design that I went with. And I've also marked out where all the colors are going to be. I don't end up doing the sort of curved edges at the top here, but these are all the colors that I ended up using. I didn't film most of the painting. I figured it'd be kind of boring to watch. So here it is, all the red down. You can see it's pretty thin. I ended up having to do, I think, 4 coats total with all the colors. You can see the blue went in between the red, and then I did yellow for the stripes on the side here. I did reinforce the white as well. It was just kind of hard to tell on the camera. Now for this, I figured to fix this, I could make this sort of a damaged area that had been patched over and fixed. So I basically just cut out this folded over part to make it as thin as possible, and then just cut a square of the pillowcase that I left over, painted it white, and then I just used some PVA glue to create sort of a patch. And then there was one other area that was pretty ugly where there was a weird fold. I did the same thing on that section as well. Just used some more PVA glue to secure the edges, make sure it wasn't gonna lift up while it was drying. You see here, here's the other patch that I did on the bottom here. With all the paint dry and done, I wanted to add some more detail. I had this gold string. And I thought it would be a nice edge to all the different sections of the colors. So I cut some lengths to fit, and then just using some tacky glue, I laid this down where the color changes to create some more separation between them. So I did this all over the top as well as all the different sections on the I guess vertical walls as well. Here it is all done. You can see that adds a really nice pop of color and gives it that more fantastical look that I think Circus has. You can see with the patch, I just skipped over it basically, like a chunk was removed and something else was sewn in there. Now I wanted to add a trim to cover up the edge here, and I ended up getting some cheap gift wrap ribbon, like you would use to wrap like a Christmas present, something like that. This is very thin and flexible, and it also had a nice sort of satin shine, which I thought would add an interesting feature to the overall piece. This ends up being not perfect. It folds and crinkles weird just because of the roundness of the overall shape. But I do end up liking how it goes. I'm not sure what else I would have used here. Maybe some cloth would have been better. But I like the sheen that the ribbon gave. So we went all the way around the top edge here, again to cover that rough pillowcase edge, as well as the ends of all of the gold ropes. And then I also do the same thing at the very bottom of the tent, again to just cover the ugly edges as well as the ends of all the gold rope pieces. Once that was all glued in place, I moved on to the tops of the spires, and I wanted to add some nice interest and make sort of caps for these. So I'm going to use these 3 beads as the base of my little spires here. This sort of flat one in the middle and then the other 2 on the outside. And then to sort of connect them to all the gold rope, I just looped around a couple pieces here just to make sure everything was cohesive and sort of put together. Now, one of the details it does give in the book is that the outside of the tent has sort of posters of the different acts that happen. So all these pictures I printed out on my computer were all straight from the book. Just cut them out and then just using some full strength PVA glue. I'm gonna glue these into the front 4 sections here and then just go over the paper as well with some more glue to make sure that it's not gonna lift up and it's really just gonna be secure and flat. Now, while that was drying, I wanted to add a bit of stitching detail to my patches up here, so I'm just going to use a paint pen and just draw these in. I could have actually sort of sewn in some detail, but frankly, that just seemed like a lot of work for not a lot of payout, so just using the paint pen here, nice and easy. At this point, I decided that I wanted to make this have a playable interior. I originally started to cut off all of the extra chipboard from the base, but I decided to just rip it all off. Everything was just hot glued on, so it was relatively to rip off, and now this is a essentially hollow building that I can make a base for. So next I wanted to add a set of sort of curtains for the door or entrance. I found this sort of mesh fabric at the dollar store. Lots of good stuff you can find there during this time of year with all the Halloween stuff, but I thought this might be a good material to use. So I just cut a square of it out and then cut most of it in half to create the 2 different curtain pieces. And then after measuring and cutting a barbecue skewer, this is going to be sort of the rod that holds everything in place. And then took that outside and spray painted that same white from before. The spray paint ended up acting like a glue itself, so I didn't end up needing to glue anything together. And while that was drying, I wanted to add a couple lights as well. So I made this little light fixture here. This is super simple, just an LED light and a battery. And you can see as I push the battery through the slot in the foam, it connects to the LED and turns it on. Nice and simple. I didn't need to be too complicated here. I ended up making 2 of these, and these I'm going to hot glue just inside the door, out of sight. And that way I can sort of turn these on and sort of imply that there's a show going on inside of the tent. And you can see just pushing those batteries down a little further connects them to the lights, and then gives a nice little light show on the outside. So back to the curtain. It's mostly dry here. I wanted it to be a little bit flexible because I wanted to use some of my gold rope to tie some, I guess, fasteners to the curtain, like they're being held open so people can come in and out. After those were glued on, I sort of just dry fitted it in place, made sure everything was going to work out, and then just hot glued all the edges down, made sure there wasn't going to be any gaps or anything, and then trimmed off the extra length at the bottom here, so that it was flush with the bottom of the tent. And here is that all glued in place. Now to finish off the spires, I painted a couple of toothpicks silver, and I'm just going to glue these in place on the 2 outside beads, and then use another bead as just a little bit more extra detail on these. Now the picture had each of these spires having a star at the top, but I thought that might be a little too much, so I ended up just making 1 star for the central spire out of a couple pieces of chipboard and some dollar store foam board. I painted that up in that same yellow as the tent, and again just a toothpick painted silver and another one of those beads, and just glued that into place on my center spire. And that is the end of the construction, but I felt everything was a little bit too clean, a little bit too pristine, so I wanted to add a little bit of weathering. Now these are pastel sticks that I have ground up into as fine a powder as I could. This idea came from Bill Making Stuff channel over there. This is a super cheap way to get some nice pigment powder, and I'm just using a paintbrush and sort of smooshing this on at the bottom, sort of where dirt would accumulate and collect. I also used a bit of green and purple to add some sort of mystery and imply the otherworldly nature of this tent, and then took it outside and sprayed it with some clear coat, and with that everything is all done. Here is the final piece. You can see it's super bright, super colorful, kind of a nice contrast to my normal terrain builds, but I'm really happy with how this turned out. Like I said at the beginning, this is probably one of my more favorite projects that I've made, much to my surprise. You can see I've also added a couple little star details on the outside just for a little bit more detail. If you want to see the construction of the interior, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you are aware when that video comes out, probably be in couple weeks or so. I would also appreciate if you hit the like button and left a comment. I'm always looking for project ideas or suggestions on things I could have done differently or better. I do have an Instagram account as well if you want to check that out. I post in progress pictures as well as other things that I've got going on. I also have an Etsy shop where you can pick up dungeon tiles and other accessories to go with your tabletop games. The link for both of those can be found in the description below. But more than anything, thank you so much for stopping by. Hope to see you next time.